是今日各位同事早晨嚇，我哋咧就
Members, good morning. This is already 10:45. May I call to order meeting of the Bills Committee on the Five Services Amendment Bill 2015.
請大家提名。
Dr. Elizabeth Quat, Dr. Loy Kwok. Any seconder? Mr. Frankie Yik. Dr. Low, do you accept? Yes. It's a valid nomination. Any other nominations? 1, 2, 3. All right. Dr. Low, you have been elected as the chairman. Congratulations. Thank you for your support.
需唔需要？
Do we need a deputy chairman? No need, then that would be fine. So at this stage, let's invite the administration's team to join us.
咁相信咧，大家同事都
I think you will still have the bill fresh in your memory. This is because the Fire Services Amendment Bill 2015 reached the ultimate stage in terms of deliberation. Unfortunately, the second reading debate was not resumed upon the end of the term. So we see a slight change in the title of the bill. It is now Fire Services Amendment Bill 2016. As far as the content is concerned, basically it is the same as what we have looked at in the past. However, there have been revisions to take on board your suggestions for amendments. The CSAs have all been incorporated. First of all, I would like to give the floor to the administration for a briefing. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, members. We are now reintroducing the bill. I would like to take this opportunity to talk about the scheme. The purpose of the bill is to launch a scheme. So we would like to brief you on the scheme. And then during the last term, there was a bills committee, and we gave a briefing at that meeting. But since you have got new members, so I would like to defer to the representatives from the Fire Services Department. Thank you, Chairman. I would like to introduce you to the Registered Fire Engineer Scheme. Well, we need to carry out a fire risk assessment so as to draw up a plan for compliance by the relevant persons. And in fact, we need to check for compliance. When it is found that the requirements have been complied with, then a fire service certificate will be issued. When we look at the food premises, generally it takes 17 days for the licensing process to be completed, in the sense that the fire safety risk assessment can be conducted and the fire safety requirements can be formulated. 14 days to conduct the compliance inspection and certification. We would like to implement the Registered Fire Engineer Scheme so as to carry out the risk assessment and to issue the certificates. On two occasions, that is in 2007 and 2011, 2 rounds of public consultations were carried out. We consulted the relevant trades, professional organizations and stakeholders, as well as the Business Facilitation Advisory Committee, the business liaison groups, as well as various government departments. The majority of the stakeholders supported the scheme. They also agreed that a regulatory and monitoring mechanism should be established so as to be assured of the quality of the work, and it is believed that a phased implementation approach with certain types of licensed premises, those prescribed premises, as a prudent start. an independent consultant was identified to carry out a business impact assessment. It was found that the service providers, that is the professionals, as well as the service users, namely the license applicants, generally supported the scheme. They believed that it would provide an additional option for the service users, and it could help to expedite the license application process. It was found that there would not be negative impacts on the existing stakeholders, for example, the contractors. So in summary, there will be the following benefits if we are to launch the scheme. First of all, we can provide an option for licensed applicants. Applicants can get fire engineer, registered fire engineers to provide a service for them, and you could also shorten the processing time in license application and provide flexible services. We believe that it takes 5 days to have an on-site risk assessment and draw up the relevant requirements, and then for the compliance inspection, it can be completed in 2 to 3 days' time. It is believed that they may provide more flexible service, say for example carrying out the inspection at night and having it re-inspected within a shorter period of time, and it will enhance business competitiveness, it will increase job opportunities. We would like to have a phased implementation, and we'll start with the prescribed premises. Our proposal is to have 3 categories of registered fire engineers. They are registered fire engineers RA, that is risk assessment, who will conduct the fire risk assessment, formulate fire safety requirements, RFE, FSI, who will conduct compliance inspection on fire service installations and issue the certificate or similar instrument, as well as the RFE vents, that is RFE ventilation systems, who will conduct compliance inspection on ventilation system and issue fire safety certificates or similar instruments. If we are to implement this scheme, option 1 can be invoked, that is to get the RFE in both jobs, or you may have the RFE engaged for one of the jobs, like in options 2 or 3, or you may also still rely on the FSD, that is option 4, which is the existing mechanism. In other words, there will be a greater degree of flexibility. As to the registration itself, it will be carried out by the FSD. Qualified persons with relevant professional experience may put in an application. There will be a validation, there will be an interview, and then when approved, they can register with the FSD to become an RFE. In relation to the regulatory mechanism, it will be pitched at different levels. First of all, at the time of application for registration, we propose that there will be a registration committee acting as the gatekeeper with members from the FSD and professionals and academics, so as to make sure that they are qualified. The FSD will also draft a code of practice and or practice notes for them to follow. There will be a disciplinary and appeal mechanism, so as to assure us of their standards and their code of conduct. In the initial stage, the FSD will endorse the fire safety requirements formulated by the RFE-RA, and then there will be audit inspection by the FSD after fire safety certification by the RFE, FSI, and RFE events. And then there will be 70% of those certification that will be audited, but of course the figure can be adjusted. Should there be irregularities, we will take appropriate action. Say, for example, we will be sending out abatement notices, and we'll also check if the engineers have been following the code of practice. If necessary, we can take disciplinary action against the relevant RFEs. Now, we propose to take the legislative route to introduce the RFE scheme. Thank you. All right, the floor is now open to members for questions. 5 minutes each for the time being. Dr. Elizabeth Court and then Mr. Chen Cheng-ying. Elizabeth. Yes. for the Five Services Amendment Bill 2016. It should have been endorsed in the previous term. Unfortunately, it was delayed because of the filibustering. I just want to say that the DAB supports the reintroduction of the bill. If I may seek some clarification. Now, have you assessed the impact on the time taken to finish the job with the introduction of the RFEs? Currently, the time frame is 17 days and 14 days respectively for the assessment and the certification. We did assess the impact. Instead of taking 34 days in total, it will need 7 to 8 days only for food premises. I'm sure in this way we can benefit the entire industry. Do you have a target that is how many fire engineers can successfully get registered in a short, medium and long term? In the market, we believe that for those who are qualified and for those in the risk group, there will be 150 of them. And then for the other two groups, about 1,500. Probably there will be an upward assessment. This is because that's the earlier sort of assessment. Now, with the introduction of the scheme, the market will develop in such a way that more engineers will come forward to get registered. So what is our ultimate target? We don't actually have a target as to how many engineers we need to be registered. But we believe that if the scheme is popular, we believe that many professionals will become interested and will get registered. Chair, the time taken will be cut from 34 to 7 to 8 days. I want to know about the sort of basis of your assessment. How many professionals have you got in mind when you arrive at such a figure? Now, we talk about the licensing process. Currently, for the service provided by the FSD at the time of risk assessment, we need around about 14 days. And for the licensed premises, or for the prescribed premises, once the equipment and installations have been completed, we need another 13 or 14 days, so a total of 30 days. So if we rely on the RFEs to provide the service, the initial risk assessment can be completed in 3 to 4 days' time. Well, as a result of the market forces, and the applicant may put in certain requests, and then the professionals may be providing the service in a more flexible manner. So probably for the compliance inspection, it can be done in 2 to 3 days time. And that's why we are saying that a total of 7 to 8 days will suffice if we have the scheme introduced. I don't think your question has been answered, right? I think she was saying that for you to expedite your process by so much, how many RFEs would you need? Can you give us an idea? Yes, I do understand her question. But then when we look at the reduction of time taken, it's based on the work process involved in a case. As to how many RFEs would be needed by the market, we haven't got any assessment. But I just want to say that if there is a demand for such a service in the market, in other words, if it is popular, then I believe that there will be an adequate number of RFEs to provide the service for the prescribed premises.
Perhaps I should put it the other way around. I'd like to know, on average, how many cases do you receive per year, Mr. Zhang? For license applications where the FSD is involved with about 3,500 cases per year. 3,500 cases. So do you expect most of them to be handled by RFEs, or do you have a percentage in mind? Of course, we hope that the new scheme would be welcomed by the market, and FSD will continue to provide the service. So you don't have any assessment as to how many cases can be taken up by the market so as to expedite the processing time. Right now, we do not have any assessment. It depends on the popularity of the scheme. Do we have 5 minutes or 10 minutes? 5 minutes. Okay, next. Mr. Chen Zhenying. Para 13 says that the last public consultation was done in 2011 involving the industry, and mid-2013 there's a business impact assessment. I'm not asking for these two public consultation exercises to be done again, but for the public consultation and business impact assessment done in 2011 and 2013 respectively, have there been major changes since then to the extent that we can support your amendments at this time? Thank you. I think the response from the industry has been consistent so far. In 2015, we introduced the amendment bill, and we briefed the security panel as well as the bills committee. Many members of the council and members of the industry expressed support for the bill. And recently, when we decide to reintroduce the bill, we have approached the Institute of Engineers and surveyors respectively, and their position has not changed and is consistent. They would like to develop the registered fire engineers profession in the market. So from what we gather, the industry is supportive. All right. For para 13, the last paragraph, it is said that there should be a sufficient supply of potential RFE candidates in the market. There must be a number in mind when you made this statement to ensure that there should be a sufficient number of RFEs in the market. So we're told that for the first category there would be 150, and for FSI 1,500. I'd like to know whether there's been an increase in this 150 or 1,500 respectively since then, because we don't want to have too few, because that would risk a monopoly by certain people, and we don't want to have too many to extend that quality is not guaranteed, affecting fire safety. So has there been any change in the supply of suitable candidates in the market? And if yes, have we got more or fewer now? Mr. Zhang. So I gave the panel or the BC2 figures, and this is an estimate of the number of suitable candidates for RFE RA, and that's 150, and for RFE FSI about 1,500. We believe the number will increase after the scheme is introduced. And we believe the supply is sufficient to meet the demand in the market. Just for comparison purpose, at present, within the FSD, staff responsible for license application and verification numbers about 1,300. 130. That means by introducing the scheme, they'll be able to be sufficient to cope with the demand from the market. Given the estimated number of eligible candidates in the market. Mr. Yao? Well, you can regard it as a development process. Of course, we can do a survey of the amount of candidates in the market, but we believe after the scheme has been up and running for a while, the profession will develop. There may be more people wanting to be RFEs. Young persons may receive training in tertiary institutions, and the institutions will also have the incentive to offer such courses. So while we have given you some figures, we believe the number will rise in the market after the scheme is introduced. Mr. Edward Yu, in fact, from what I gather from two associations of surveyors, I don't think they are not as comfortable with the scheme as set by the administration. They have expressed their personal worries, and some surveyors have expressed their concerns in their personal capacity. So we're given two figures, 150 RFE RAs and 2 FSI, 1,500 FSIs. Now, as said in the brief, they are not really engineers, but professionals. That is, my understanding is that you will allow other professionals to provide such services so long as they meet certain requirements. So can you change the name of the bill to a fire engineer authorized persons bill or something of that kind, so that people will not have the misconception that only engineers are allowed to be registered? When we discussed this bill in the last session, there was a discussion of this at length. There will be a vetting panel, and then these persons can be registered if they meet certain qualifications. And there were some amendments afterwards. Perhaps the administration can explain, because I was a member of the BC last time. So can someone from the administration explain? Mr. Yao or Mr. Yao. Thank you, Mr. Yu, for your question. The qualification requirements of the RFE. Yes, Mr. Yu is correct in saying that last year we had a discussion of this. So who can become RFEs? There are several avenues. You may like to refer to our annex or appendix to the paper. Now, they will have to be an engineer or professional dealing with fire services, or he has taken fire services related courses, or someone who have mature roots or experienced personnel in the trade. So there are several ways for people to be eligible. We do not just allow engineers to be registered. The name is, now perhaps Mr. Zhang can supplement later. We'll talk about management of fire services installations, fire prevention and behavior at fires and so forth. The industry usually calls them fire engineering works. I beg to differ. Well, last year, or in the last BC, there was a prolonged discussion of this matter. And as a member said, there were some views received. But towards the end of the work of the BC last time, we had the agreement of the Hong Kong IE and the Hong Kong IS. We hope that the name can reflect the professionalism of the industry and that it can be accepted by the industry. But when it comes to who can become our FEs, as said, there can be various channels. Well, a follow-up. Would there be a grandfathering scheme when the bill first commences, and then after a while there will be another appraisal or verification system for RFEs? Mr. Yao, grandfathering means those who are in the trade can continue to do so. But as said in the PowerPoint, we don't have any such people in the market. The job is being done by FSD, and the scheme will allow someone in the market to take up the job being done by the FSD. So this is not really grandfathering. So perhaps Mr. Yu is asking whether there will be people who are doing related work in the market. So I'm thinking of people who have accumulated substantial experience doing related works, and then using the experience, the threshold for their entering or to be registered and may be more favorable than other people. Well, I just want to say that the Hong Kong IE and the Hong Kong IS have strong views about this. May I refer you to electrical paper CB21817/1560, report of the BC Fire Services Amendment Bill 2015. Para 19 talks about the views of the Hong Kong Institute of Para 29 is about the views of the Hong Kong IE. On the name of registered fire engineer, the Hong Kong Institute of Surveyors has submitted its views to the administration that it is of a neutral stance to the name registered fire engineer, as it only reflects the position or job title of a wide spectrum of professionals who undertake fire safety related assignments. The Buildings Department Local Building Surveyors Association has, however, remained of the view that a more neutral name should be adopted. After consideration of the views of the relevant stakeholders, members, including those who once had concern over the name, have decided not to pursue the issue further. That is, ultimately, we accepted the name registered fire engineer for members' information. Any more? Mr. Alvin Young. Thank you, Chairman. The monitoring of the regulatory regime and this panel for dealing with registration, the registration committee. Give an idea as to who will sit on the registration committee, and in the long term, well, we're told that there are 130 FS officers doing this job. In the long term, will our FEs replace these colleagues altogether, or are you going to adopt a dual-track approach? Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Yao. Regarding the regulatory regime, I'll go into the details. There will be a monitoring on two fronts. First, the threshold for registration. Want to ensure that only people with professional knowledge plus relevant experience can be allowed to be registered. So the first monitoring is at the point of entry. And the registration committee referred to by Mr. Young will decide what will be the requirements or qualifications for registration.
Upon enactment of the bill, we will come up with regulations to deal with the qualifications needed. Basically, we'll be looking at professionals within the sector who will become members of the registration committee. Let me sort of chip in. You haven't got a sector because it is only now that we are introducing the scheme, so you can't really talk about who's actually already in the sector. Well, let me explain. We already have this profession. Take the Hong Kong IE as an example. Within our structure, fire engineers used to be incorporated under the buildings engineers. A few years ago, they become a standalone category. So we do have fire engineers. Therefore, if we are to prepare a register containing the names of the fire engineers taking up the 3 areas of work, there will already be professionals who are ready for registration. Now, of course, you are introducing a new scheme, but then the sector already exists in Hong Kong, and the standard is very high. Well, in the past, as far as licensing was concerned, it was within the FSD. Now they would like to allow third parties to carry out the work, and applicants still keep the option of having it done by the FSD, so it will be a dual track system. Thank you, Chair, for your clarification. Yes, please go on. Now, picking up on the point about the dual track system. Now, there are 130 fire services officers in the department, so they will be keeping their posts, but I want to know whether there will be a need to reduce the number of posts in the long run. Well, probably with the decrease in workload, there will be redeployments. Thank you, Chair. That takes us back to the earlier question. Of course, within the sector, we have got the professionals who are very experienced, and also engineers, surveyors are also related professionals. In the future, applicants can have a choice. Either they go to the RFEs or they can still opt for the FSD to do it for them. So for those who can afford it, I think the applicants will opt for the RFE's service. And in the long term, as Alvin Young has said, probably there will be a reduction in the demand for such professionals in the FSD, but it will take time, and then we'll keep it in view to note the rate of decrease. And in the initial phase of the implementation, since fire safety is something important, we will try to maintain a higher rate of auditing in order to play safe. Therefore, in the initial phase, there will indeed be a demand for the service from the FSD. But in the longer term, we'll try to see whether there is a huge deduction in the demand, and then there will be implications on our manpower. When you talk about auditing, say for example, in the course of auditing, it is found that some of the RFEs have omitted certain things either unintentionally or deliberately. I'm sure the FSD will look at it again. But what about the professionals who have signed the certificates? Are you going to discipline them? Will they be warned? Can you elaborate? Mr. Chung. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mr. Young, for your question. The scheme has been drafted in such a way that we are going to introduce different elements of regulation, including the following. That is, we'll be auditing the work carried out by the RFEs. For the scenario outlined by Mr. Young, we will investigate into the matter to find out whether the RFE has done anything which is in breach of the code of conduct. Say, for example, issuing false or misleading certificates. If it can be established, the case may be referred to the disciplinary committee, and in serious cases, we suggest that in the subsidiary legislation, criminal liability can be introduced to oversee the work of the RFEs. All right, thank you. Any other questions? If not, yes, I think we can proceed to the cross-by-cross scrutiny. Who will assist us in this cross-by-cross scrutiny? I think we will use the marked up copy, right? That is paper CB bracket 2 457/16 to 17 bracket 02. Let me give you an overview, and then I will defer to Mr. Chen, and he will walk you through the bill. The overview will be simple. For Chapter 95, we would like to introduce an enabling provision so that the Senior Council may introduce subsidiary legislation so as to regulate the registered fire engineers so as to implement the scheme. We'll talk about the qualifications, and mention has been made about the disciplinary mechanism, membership of the registration committee. And then there are also other consequential amendments. As the chair has said, on this occasion, the bill is different from the previous bill in one area. We have incorporated the CSA already agreed by the Bills Committee. Originally, the subsidiary legislation to be made by the Senior Council will be subject to negative vetting. After deliberation of the Bills Committee, we have now changed it to positive vetting so that the LegCo will have more time to deliberate that particular piece of subsidiary legislation. My colleague can walk you through the bill. Mr. Chen. Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. So please take a look of the marked up copy. It is LC paper, CB bracket 2 457/16 to 17 bracket 02. So the bill starts with the amendment to the long title. So towards the end of the long title, we'd like to add the purpose of the bill, that is to provide for registered fire engineers and a scheme for fire safety risk assessment and certification on compliance with fire safety requirements by registered fire engineers for certain premises, and to make provision for purposes connected with the matters aforesaid. I think members have no questions. Please continue. Please turn to page 4, section 2 of the FSO. In relation to interpretation, we are going to add 4 definitions. They are registered fire engineer, registered fire engineer fire service installation, registered fire engineer risk assessment, and registered fire engineer ventilation system, respectively. First of all, for the RFE, a person who is registered as a registered fire engineer under the regulations made under this ordinance, and we have also the corresponding definitions for RFE, FSI, RFE, RA, RFE, fence. So this the same as the definitions in the Bill 2015, right? And then, as Mr. Yao has mentioned, in the bill that we are proposing, we'd like to empower the CE in Council to make regulations concerning the scheme. So on page 5, you see the various items running from GA to GI. GA is about the registration and deregistration of RFEs, GB, fees to be charged in relation to registration and deregistration, GC, establishment, powers and procedures of a registration committee, GD, establishment of an interview board panel, the appointment, powers and procedure of interview boards in relation to the registration of RFEs, GE, that's about the duties of RFEs in relation to fire safety risk assessment and certification on compliance with fire safety requirements for premises prescribed by regulations made under this section. GF, that's about the possible irregularities committed by the RFEs. GG, the disciplinary mechanism. We'd like to set up a disciplinary board panel, and the panels we will set up under the disciplinary board. GH, the grounds on which appeals may be lodged in relation to the registration of RFEs or RFEs themselves. GI, this in relation to the appeal board panel and the appeal boards to be appointed. We talk about the powers as well as the procedure. Lastly, GJ, in future, the FSD may issue codes of practice concerning fire safety of any premises, and the FSD may also give guidance in relation to the professional conduct of the RFEs. So this is an enabling provision. Mr. Chen, a question? Thank you, Chair. I don't have questions about the provisions of the bill, but then I hope the law draftsman can look at GD, GG, and GI. Let me first of all talk about GC. Establishment, powers and procedure of a registration committee in relation to the registration of registered fire engineers. So establishment, powers and procedure are linked together. But then in Chinese, they have the word 設立, which is a verb, and then 權力 and 程序. I think something is missing there. Maybe they need a verb to cover powers and procedures. I think the same applies to GD, etc. Again, for GD, that's about the establishment of a panel and the appointment powers, etc. But then in Chinese, that's about the establishment of the panel and appointment of the board. And again, something is missing. I think a verb is missing there to cover powers and procedures. So the same argument is applicable to the other subparagraphs. Yes, Ms. Choi. Thank you, Chairman. Well, the nature of the two languages is different. It doesn't always work in such a way that it is, if we have a verb in the English version, we also get a verb in the Chinese version. Now, I think about the establishment as well as the powers and procedure. Well, in fact, we want to sort of echo what we have earlier on in the Chinese provision, because in Chinese the paragraph starts with "may by regulation provide for the following matters." So I think we need to read the first part of paragraph section 25. And as to the drafting style, it was acceptable to the previous term of the lexical. We do accommodate this kind of difference between the Chinese as well as the English versions. I think we need a certain degree of flexibility so that it is more idiomatic.
Thank you. I think we have to look at it together with 25(1). If we read them together, then I think it will be easier to understand and the flow will be okay. I think that's my understanding. Any views? No? Then good. Then we move on. Thank you. Please turn to page 7. Continue to amend section 25 and powers to make regulations. We propose to add 4, subsection 4. A regulation made under subsection 1G, A, G, C, G, D, G, E, so on and so forth is subject to the approval of the Legislative Council. It was agreed at the last BC that this should be moved as a CSA. For a regulation made under subsection 1GA, we agree with the exception of GB. In future, all these regulations can be made by means of positive vetting. GA is the registration and deregistration of registered fire engineers. Because the fees can be, for GB, it's about the fees. Fees can be changed from time to time. So usually it is by negative vetting. But for other than GB, for all other regulations under 1, they will be under G1G, they will be made by positive vetting. Well, this is in response to members' comments made at the last BC. So it's now very clear. From GA, GC, GD, so on and so forth, regulations will be made by positive vetting. For GB, the usual practice is by negative vetting. So Mr. Vin Young raised a concern. He said there were irregularities or problems of the work of an RFE. How would it be dealt with? It would be dealt with. It would be spelled out in the subsidiary legislation. We'll have the opportunity to examine them before they are passed. So the bill sets out the regulatory framework, and implementation details will be found in the subsidiary legislation. We'll have the opportunity to examine them in details later. Okay? Mr. Chen Han-pen, I was not a member of the last BC, so I have some questions to ask. Some professionals have been embroiled in disputes or controversies such as bid rigging. So when it comes to fees charged by RFE and also the checking, the percentage of checking of the works, I was told that would be 70%. I'd like to know whether that would be lower in the at a later stage. And design will be done by FACs to be approved or vetted by FSD. Would there be gray areas? Because if everything is done by the FSD, then the public is very clear as to what they should do. If first it is designed by an RFE to be approved by the FSD, how is this going to be done in practice? And if RFEs are suspected to have engaged in a bid rigging, then what should members of the public do? Should they report them, or is there any preventive mechanism? Mr. Zhang. Thank you, Mr. Chen, for your question. An important element of the scheme is monitoring of service quality and to ensure that services provided by our FEs are up to the safety requirements. If the license applicant employs an RFE to conduct a risk assessment, if the risk assessment report or requirements are made by the RFE, then the report must be approved by the FSD to ensure that the proposals are in compliance with our safety requirements. That's number one. Secondly, after the works are completed, as I said, in the initial stage of the scheme, we will have a high random checking rate. Our plan now is to achieve at least a 70% checking rate. This is to ensure that no matter whether you employ the service of an RFE or the FSD, the fire safety standard will be the same, and there won't be any safety concerns or risks. Mr. Chen asked about the tendering arrangements of works. We would like to introduce ethics requirements or code, something like a code of professional standards for the RFEs. The monitoring mechanism will be set out in details in the subsidiary legislation, and we will also consult the relevant bodies such as the ICAC to ensure that the system is properly run. Take architects as an example. An architect is a registered professional, and the building works will be done by another batch of people. So should the bidding be done separately by these two groups of people or together? We have sought the advice of ICAC, and our preliminary plan is the RFE should not be related to the applicant and the contractor in any way, because the contractor will have to carry out the actual works, and therefore he should not be monitored by an RFE which is linked to him in any way. In maintenance works, we find this arrangement not so desirable. There is an RFE and there is also a contractor. The RFE is supposedly acting on behalf of the FSD to conduct risk assessment, and the contractor will carry out the works according to the design. Would there be any possibility of collusion between the two? For instance, will there be a lot of works added to the original design? So, since we are working on a new scheme, we have to be very careful to ensure that the scheme will not cost consumers a lot more, because after a contract is awarded, if there are many additional works proposed to the original design, that would involve a lot of extra expenses. In the past, the contracts are awarded as lump sum contracts. If in the future we have a professional and also a contractor, and the two working together can lead to many problems. I'd like to know whether the department has ever considered this issue. Mr. Zhang. Thank you. Yes, we attach a lot of significance to the monitoring of works. We will consider in great details in relation to the problems raised by Mr. Chen to ensure that there is proper monitoring so that the works and the design are up to the safety standards. And when sub-leg is introduced, we will brief members on the proposed monitoring scheme. When we consider the sub-leg, we will have the opportunity to consider these issues and, of course, to avoid loopholes. Mr. Edward Yu, speaker is off mic. Speaker is off mic. You talked about fees to be charged. Will this conflict with the competition ordinance? And there will be 3 committees: the interview boards, the discipline interview board, the registration committee, and an interview board. Why don't you consider setting up a complaints committee if licensees, if the clients are not happy with the services of RFEs? Would there be an avenue for them to complain? In addition to a random checking, will there be a mechanism to monitor the works of these boards? For instance, will there be a review or any reports required? First, GB. GB will talk about fees to be charged to the registration and deregistration of registered fire engineers. Now, if you want to register, you have to pay a fee to the FSD. So we'll talk about the fees to be paid by the FSD instead of fees to be paid by a potential client. As for complaint avenue, in working out the details of the scheme in the sub-leg, well, we will continue to consult the trade, and the trade will make suggestions as to how users can complain against them. But if there is nothing in the principal ordinance, then you don't have the power to establish such a committee in the sub-leg, do you? Well, even though the service is being provided by the FSD, and if a licensed applicant is not happy with our service, he for sure has a way to complain against us. So there is no preventing users from lodging complaints. Well, we have such committees, and there are checks and balances among them. For instance, registration. There is an appeal committee. So there are checks and balances here. And the purpose of these boards and committees is to provide checks and balances in registration, deregistration, and disciplinary matters.
The Property Services Management or Property Management Services Ordinance was enacted, and well, in fact, there is a schedule in that piece of ordinance to talk about the membership of various panels and committees. I would advocate the same to be done here, so as to make sure that the committees will have the right composition of members. There was a discussion along this line last time. I think the administration gave us some explanation. Of course, the details can only be found in the subsidiary legislation. Perhaps you can elaborate on the legislative intent, say, for example, how the registration committee is to be sort of formed. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Dr. Yim, for your comments. For the scheme of the RFEs, there will be lots of implementation details covering different areas. When we drafted the regulatory framework, the purpose was to do the following. That is, we provide a framework in the principal ordinance and enable the Seeing Council to make regulations. Of course, we understand Dr. Yim's point that it is desirable to spell out clearly the provisions. That's why we'll have subsidiary legislation. And other than that, covering the charging of fees, the subsidiary legislation will be subject to positive vetting, so the electrical members can vet the details, say, for example, composition of various committees and panels. Therefore, we believe that subjecting the subsidiary legislation to positive vetting will mean that the cumbersome and detailed provisions can be scrutinized by you, and that will be a good arrangement. All right, if there aren't other questions, let's continue. Mr. Chen, you do have other questions? Mr. Chen, about the fees. How do you compare the fees to be charged by the RFEs and the FSD? And then in Appendix 1 to a paper given out, I'm concerned about the workflow. We are concerned about the workflow because it is very similar to building management or building maintenance. You get a professional to carry out an assessment like building inspection or window inspection, and then a repair plan will be drawn up, and then you have to submit the plan to the department. In that case, buildings department, in this case FSD, and then you have a tender exercise, and then there will be further sort of approval. So the whole thing will be very similar to that in building maintenance, and I'm afraid that there will be problems when a professional has been engaged. Then the fire services engineers under him will also be engaged. So it is like bid rigging. Many professionals are sort of very good, and they dare not join the building maintenance sector. So what worries me is that in future, maybe the RFEs will get a job at a low price, and then later on they may cooperate with fire service contractors. They will try to push up the price of the job, and then the public would have to pay an excessive fee unnecessarily. Therefore, I think you need to make sure that there won't be any bid rigging, so that the contractors can be given encouragement to take part in the job, because they don't want to be put off by professionals who don't like their job and won't fit the job. So I want to know whether this is sort of being taken care of. Mr. Yao, thank you, Chair, thank you, Member. When it comes to the formulation of the details, we will have a procedure, we will consult the public, but Mr. Chen's point is noted. Mr. Chen is worried that there may be irregularities. Well, this is why, in relation to this new profession, we would like to legislate for the scheme. And as the FSD colleagues have mentioned, we hope that the RFEs and the contractors should not be related or associated. In fact, the relationship has to be spelled out. And then there are also other sort of checks and balances as to how the RFEs are going to carry out their work. They have to follow our code of practice. If they don't, as I have said, they will be subject to disciplinary action. In serious cases, there will be criminal liability. And as Mr. Chen has mentioned, we have to look at complaints by the public. Now, if the RFEs are not doing their job properly, and there are channels for complaints, we want to legislate for the scheme, because for this new profession, we want to give you assurance. I support the idea of having RFEs, but I'm concerned about the details, because we need to learn from the experience of building maintenance. For authorized persons, yes, they are subject to disciplinary action, they can become criminally liable, and they may also declare that they are not related to the contractors. You have said that there will be consultation, there will be an established procedure to go through the consultation. So I just want you to make sure that you will put in place safeguards against bid rigging, so as to prevent the irregularities in building maintenance emerging in this field. I think the officials here have noted your concern. On this occasion, the administration has been responsive to our demand, and the subsidiary legislation will be subject to positive vetting. So I will invite you to join the relevant subcommittee on the subsidiary legislation. Mr. Chen Chen-ying. Well, say for example, at the time of risk assessment, an RFE has been appointed, but later on, when it comes to the ventilation systems as well as the FSIs, they may go back to the FSD. So does it mean that if the applicant is not happy with the quality of the work, the applicant can always come back to get the service of the FSD? In other words, this can become an enhancement. The member's understanding is correct. Even with the introduction of the RFE scheme, the FSD will continue to provide the service that we are providing now. That is, even if an applicant starts with an RFE to provide risk assessment, upon completion of the installations, the FSD's service can still be requested for the compliance check as well as the issuance of the certificate. All right, let's continue. We can go to part 3 if there are no other questions. Our legal advisor, perhaps we can move on with part 3. Part 3 is about the amendment to the fire service installations and equipment regulations. That's in relation to paragraph 7. Well, the subsidiary legislation is about fire service installations and equipment. We talk about who can be responsible for the maintenance, inspection, and repair. Originally, it says that no person other than a registered contractor shall maintain, inspect, or repair any FSI or equipment which is installed in any premises. That is, we only allow a registered contractor to do this. Now that we are introducing the scheme of RFEs and to facilitate the future monitoring work, we are now saying that there should be an amendment so as to provide for additional paragraphs. That is 2, 3, and 4. Now, a registered fire engineer may inspect and test any fire service installation or equipment installed in or for any premises prescribed by regulations made under Section 25 of the Ordinance. And he may also test it. In paragraph 4, we have a similar description. Well, in future, to facilitate the colleagues of the FSD to carry out an auditing work, so we're going to give the power to the director or person authorized by the director in writing. That is, such persons may inspect and test any fire service installation or equipment installed in or for any premises for checking its safety and the efficiency of its working order. All right, our legal advisor. Well, when compared with the Fire Services Amendment Bill 2015, the proposed 7.3 and 7.4, we have the additional words or for any premises. We did write to the administration. We have been told that this is for the sake of clarity. Sometimes a fire service installation may not be set up within the premises. Say, for example, automatic sprinkler system is such that the fire service tank may be outside the restaurant rather than inside the restaurant. So the provision has to be written in such a way to cover this scenario. Now, with the addition of such words, it has led me to ask this question. Now, for Regulation 6, 7, 8, and 9, mention has been made about the fire service installation or equipment installed in any premises. So other than this section, I want to know whether you may want to make corresponding changes to other regulations so as to be consistent with paragraph 7, Regulation 7. Who will take up this question? Mr. Zhang. The legal advisor has referred to a number of provisions that's about the contractor's work covering fire service installation rather than fire service installations or equipments in a premises. Now, for the amendment that we are seeking, we are talking about specific premises. So sometimes, in reality, certain parts of the installation may not be housed within the same premises. Therefore, to cover this scenario, we would like to revise the wording of the original bill. As to the other provisions mentioned by the LA, there's no in relation to any specific premises, so the situation is different.
Under Cap 95B Hong Kong law, Section 6, for instance, the term referred to is the premises, if you have the copy with you. So let's talk about the premises and as related to Section 7. Now, if you just amend here without amending Section 6 and 1A, then will there be inconsistency as a result? You may not be able to authorize the Director of Fire Services or anyone he authorizes to go in and inspect the installations. I think the view is clear. It's true that some FS are not fire services installations are not within the premises. But what about FSIs installed in relation to the premises? So for the sake of to play safe, shouldn't you revise the wording? Well, let me tell you how we operate. The law of draftsman is asking us talk about what the RFE can do for inspection. Now, and the FSI is installed in any premises. Our amendment is about FS installed for the purpose of a particular premises. I take sprinkler system as an example. Although it is installed internally, but the supporting the spare parts or the other components might be placed at the rooftop or outside the building. If the FSIs are not in any premises but within the boundary, then we can still do it. So the drafting of sections S 6 and 9 can still reflect what the contractor can do. Perhaps after the meeting you can reconsider this point and check the relevant provisions to see any amendment is needed, okay? You still have another point? Yes. In Cap 59B, 5 services, installations and equipment regulations, Section 10 is about the standard of examination, and that is there may be regulation of the FSI and so on and so forth. 95B is about the FSIs and equipment. Now, this is not within your amendments this time, but you're using fire service equipment. Should it be amended to FSI or equipment to echo the definition in Cap 95? And would there be a consequential amendment here or corresponding amendment here? That is, you may want to change it to FSI or equipment. Thank you for your question. Legal advisor will respond afterwards. Mr. Yu Chong Yim. For 7.4, I'd like to know why do we have to add inspect and test any fire service installation equipment for checking its safety and efficiency of its working order. Because it may not be related to the safety and the efficiency of its working order, I'd like to know why these two is added. Because the inspection may not be related to its safety or efficiency of its working order. Mr. Zhang, thank you. Mr. Yu, for your question. Because it reflects the actual operation of FSI or equipment. Because the installation and inspection is done by the RFE or his contractor. And FSD is responsible for checking its safety and its efficiency. And of course, the working order will include the safety when in operation. And so we have added this phrase. Can you tell me in which provision can we find these two functions of the FSD? Operationally, we have this. When we check FSIs, we may have visual inspection or carry out actual tests. The reason why we've added it here is when we have RFEs, we can go for spot checks or unannounced checking or surprise checking. Then it will give FSD flexibility, and therefore we have added this authorization. The phrase for checking, I think that is good enough. The purpose, there is no need to spell out the purpose of an inspection. By common sense, you want to ensure safety and also to check its operation. But I think to inspect and test is good enough. There is no need to spell out the purpose for checking its safety and efficiency. Without this phrase, there would your legal authority to carry out your work will not be undermined. I don't know whether Mr. Yu shares my view. I think that this phrase is redundant. Thank you. Let me put it this way. For checking its safety and the efficiency of its working order, spells out what fire service officers are doing. If you want us to delete this phrase to allow the FSD more flexibility to inspect and test FSIs or equipment with no objection. If you want to retain, you can say for checking things including safety, but including but not restricted to. Because if you only have two things here, then if you identify a third thing in your inspection, people may not allow you to inspect it. So Mr. Yu is of the view that the purpose of your inspection and test may cover more than the safety and efficiency of its working order. Please think about this. I think deleting it would not affect your policy or legislative intent, but will give you more flexibility. Yes, we will consider this, but here it reflects what we are actually doing. Yes, we understand. We understand that this is the main purpose of your inspection and test. But without this phrase, you will have more flexibility. Please think about it. Okay? Any other question? All right. Please think about the issues we raised and tell us whether you have further amendments as a result. 4. Yes. There are amendments to 6 divisions. As a result of the amendment bill, there are consequential amendments to other ordinances. First, the framework. The RFE scheme allow RFEs to provide services for some licensed premises, and the licensing authority or the respective licensing authority is spelled out in different ordinances. And in these ordinances, there is a common phrase where a certificate or approval is granted by the Director of Fire Services, then is one of the conditions for a license to be issued. Because of this, we will have to add the description or reference to a registered fire engineer so that the respective licensing authority can issue a license on the basis of certificates or approval granted by an RFS or DFS. Division 1. Amendments to miscellaneous license regulations. The licensing authority is the Home Affairs Bureau, and the premises involved are dancing halls and things like that. 33. For exits and doors under 122. Every door and barrier on the premises must open outwards, and every exit shall be plainly indicated in 170 mm letters and Chinese characters by a fixed lighted sign of a nature and a position approved by the Director of Fire Services. We expand it to approved by the Director of Fire Services or required by RFE risk assessment as defined by Section 2 of the Fire Services Ordinance. Okay? No problem. Then please go on. Page 10, Division 2. To amend the Food Business Regulation, Cap 132, Sublet X. A similar amendment to the previous one. Food Business Regulation. And the licensing authority is the FEHD. 33B states that no license shall be granted by the director, i.e. the Director of Food and Environmental Hygiene, under Section 31 unless the applicant for such license produces to the director a certificate from the Director of Fire Services and such other evidence as the director, or that is the Director for Food and Environmental Hygiene, may require to the effect that the premises in respect of which the applicant is made compliant, blah, 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 and were mandated to add a registered fire engineer fire services installation as installed by Section 2 of the Fire Services Ordinance, or by a registered fire engineer risk assessment. Okay, no question. Next, also amending Food Business Regulation, Section 33C1B. That any requirements issued by the Director of Fire Services have been complied with, then the Director may, on application, grant a provisional license permitting the carrying on of any food business mentioned in Section 31(1). So we will expand 1B to include a registered fire engineer risk assessment as defined in Section 2 of the FSO. No question. Next page. Division 3, Amendments to Places of Amusement Regulation, Cap 132, Subleg BA. That would include ice rinks, billiard halls and bowling halls, so on and so forth. The licensing authority is the LCSD. We propose to amend section 5 and 13. Take 5(2)(b) as an example. The applicant shall produce to the director such evidence as the director shall require that the premises in respect of which the license is to be issued comply with any requirement issued by the Director of Fire Services will add or a registered fire engineer risk assessment. Okay. Division 4 amendments to places of public entertainment regulations. Cap 172 subleg A.
嘅係戲院啦。
And that covers cinema, theatre, place of public entertainment, etc. So our amendment is similar. So if you turn to page 14 and please go to 3B, it says that that is unless you meet the requirements in A or B, otherwise the license cannot be issued. So it talks about the certificate issued by the Director of Fire Services and such other evidence as the licensing authority may require to show that any requirements imposed by the Director of Fire Services in respect of the premises to which the application relates have been complied with. Now we'd like to amend it to read the Director of Fire Services or a registered fire engineer fire service installation as defined by Section 2 of the FSO, and later on requirements imposed by the DFS or a registered fire engineer risk assessment. So I think the logic is clear. Page 15, a similar amendment. Instead of meeting the requirements imposed by the Director of Services in relation to the provisional license, now it reads the Director of Fire Services or a registered fire engineer in relation to the requirements. No questions. Then page 18, it is still on the places of public entertainment regulations. The change is similar. That is under Regulation 8B. It talks about by the Director of Fire Services or Fire Services officer authorized by him in that behalf for the purposes of ascertaining whether the requirements have been complied with. Now it will read the Director authorized by the Director of Services in their behalf or a RFE. And then 9C, a similar change. That is a certificate issued by the Director of Fire Services or a registered fire engineer fire service installation, as well as the requirements imposed by the Director of Fire Services or a RFE risk assessment. No questions. Then page 21. Regulation 164 of Cap 172A in relation to paragraph Q, and it says that any artificial lighting shall be to the satisfaction of the DFS or public officer authorized by the Director of Fire Services or a registered fire engineer FSI. And then for paragraph S, fire extinguishing apparatus of such type as may be required by the DFS or a registered fire engineer risk assessment may direct that the structure shall be further protected by the provision of fire services officers at the expense of the licensee. No questions? All right, fine. Please continue. Page 22, Division 5, Amendment to the Education Ordinance. That's in relation to the licensing of schools, and the licensing authority is the Education Bureau. Now, among the documents to be submitted, and you find it in C, there is the requirement for a certificate from the DFS that the use for the purposes of a school of the premises would not expose the persons to any undue risk of fire. So in addition to the DFS, a RFE FSI may also issue such a certificate. No questions? All right, thank you. Page 24, Division 6, Amendment to Non-Local Higher and Professional Education Regulation Rules, Cap 493B. And that's about premises in which registered course or exempted course is conducted. So please go to Regulation 5, Paragraph 2, Subparagraph B. Now, the licensing authority would need certain certificates. The certificate may come from the DFS. Now, the amendment is to say that RFE FSI may also issue such a certificate to be submitted. Any questions, comments? No? All right. Certain questions have been raised in relation to the text of the bill. Other than that, I think things have been working quite smoothly. Next, I would like to ask members, would you like to invite members of the public or deputations to comment on the bill? Well, in fact, this bill is such that it is a replica of the FS Amendment Bill 2015, and a public consultation has been carried out. Deputations were received by the Bills Committee, and those views, together with the views of the Bills Committee, have been incorporated into the 2016 bill. So members, please check if there is still a need to have a hearing. So either we have a hearing or we invite submission of comments in writing, so we can issue invitation letters. Mr. Wong Ting Guang. Mr. Chairman, thank you. The bill, in fact, has been inherited from the previous term, and the Bills Committee has been set up. A proper hearing has also been held, and I find that the views from the sector have been incorporated into the 2016 bill. Now we are quite busy, and I just wondered if we can sort of skip the public hearing. Your point is noted. I understand that during this period of time, the administration has been holding a dialogue with the industry. So can you tell us as to whether you have got any new points to make? Chair, as I have reported to you, now this bill is slightly different from the previous bill. We have talked to the surveyors as well as the engineers, in particular their professional bodies. Basically, they are in support. As to the implementation details, say for example the entry threshold as well as the qualification requirements, we do expect some views from them. But then after the enactment of the principal ordinance, we have to embark on the revision of the sub-leg, and there will be further consultation. They agree that we can enact the bill first, and then during the stage of the subsidiary legislation, we can talk to them again. On the part of the administration, of course, during the previous term of the LegCo, owing to some reason, the 2015 bill was not enacted. We look forward to the early enactment of the 2016 bill so that we can move on to the next stage. Mr. Wong. I think there has been a backlog of the cases to be vetted, so it will be good to expedite the legislative program that can ease the workload of the department. Well, we still have to await the preparation and introduction of the subsidiary legislation. The task will be even more sort of involved. Mr. Yim, the chartered surveyors did make a submission to the LegCo So I just wonder if we can invite the relevant professional bodies to give us further written submission. Yes, we can write to the relevant organizations to invite written submissions. Well, in this case, it means that we're basically finish our task if you haven't got anything else to say. So let's fix the date of our next meeting, as we are interested in the views from the industry, and we want the administration to come back to us on the questions asked by members as well as the query raised by the LA, and then we have to check with the administration if further revisions will be needed. I think we have to ask the professional bodies to submit to us as soon as possible. So 9th of January or 13th of January, both are Fridays. I mean, one is the 9th is Monday, the 13th is Friday, and then we may also have it on the 24th, which is a Tuesday. Now there will be a holiday break, so I think it's better to give a reasonable period of time for the deputations. The 9th will be too rushed, so what about the 13th? I think we can send out the invitation letters today. So would it be fine if we have a meeting on the 13th? Well, I think the relevant bodies are familiar with the topic, so let's fix our date of next meeting on the 13th of January at 8:30. So we've finished what we can do today, so high efficiency. Thank you, everybody. Meeting adjourned.